All right, let's dive into a figure that, well, it's captured imaginations for centuries, hasn't it? Often kind of boiled down to this simple, almost cartoonish image today, the Berserker.
Yeah, totally.
You probably picture them, wild-eyed, maybe shirtless, maybe even foaming at the mouth, just impervious to pain,
Right.
lost in this total battle frenzy.
It's a powerful image for sure. Very iconic.
It really is. But our sources today, they kind of push us to ask, how accurate is that picture, really? We've pulled together sagas, historical texts, modern analysis to really peer behind that popular cliche.
Get beyond the stereotype.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to use these sources, go beyond that stereotype, and uncover the reality and, honestly, the fascinating complexity behind the figures who inspired the Berserker myths and the history.
There's a lot more to it than just rage.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, when we look at that modern image you just described, the wild, pain-immune warrior, totally consumed by rage, it's actually, not that far off from how they're first described in some of the Norse legends and myths.
Really? So the rage part is there from the start.
Oh yeah, that core idea of an overwhelming, almost supernatural rage is absolutely central. It's kind of the defining feature.
But what's immediately clear from the sources, it wasn't just one kind of berserker in the stories, was it? It wasn't monolithic.
No, not at all. The sources show us basically two main types cropping up in these North Germanic stories. On one hand, you have these heroic figures, often shown as elite troops, personal champions for kings or princes.
The best of the best.
Pretty much. Presented as the top warriors, the shock troops, that sort of thing.
Okay. And the other type?
And then on the other hand, you find them as these dangerous, often solitary figures or maybe small groups of wandering troublemakers.
Ah, the bad guys.
Yeah, basically bandits, murderers, figures who challenge the heroes and act as antagonists in the sagas.
Wow, that duality is really striking. Same sorts of power, this incredible rage, but used in, completely different ways in the story.
Yeah.
So where do these figures first show up in the written record? What's the earliest mention?
The oldest literary description our sources point to is from the 9th century. It's in a praise poem called Harold's Quiddy, which was dedicated to King Harold Fairhair.
Right, Harold Fairhair. And that poem gives us the names, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. It introduces these angry, powerful warriors under two names mentioned almost side by side, Berserkers and Ulfhednar.
Berserkers and Ulfhednar.
And the poem describes them roaring into battle, seeming to be, very similar types of fighters, both fierce, both rage-filled.
And the names mean something specific, don't they? Ulfhednar.
Ulfhednar means wolf skinners, or maybe wolf-skinned ones. And berserker is usually translated as bear skinner or bear shirt.
So wolf skins, bear skins.
Precisely. The names themselves suggest this connection to these really powerful animals. And while both names appear early on, berserker is the one that became much more widespread later. It's the term most people know now.
Gotcha. Now, when we look for a more detailed description of the literary berserker, Snorri Sturluson's Ynglinga saga often comes up, right? His account really shaped the image for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Snorri gives this really vivid picture, and he explicitly links these warriors to the god Odin.
Odin, right. The
Yeah.
god of war, poetry, ecstasy.
Yeah. And Snorri describes them going into battle without armor, becoming almost supernaturally strong, practically invulnerable while they're in their rage state.
And that's the image, the naked, invincible warrior that really stuck, didn't it? But our source, it reveals something absolutely crucial about that specific detail in Snorri's writing.
And this is where we hit a major modern misconception based on the source analysis. Snorri's idea that they fought naked or without armor, seems to be based on a mistranslation.
A mistranslation of the name Berserker.
Yeah. It looks like Snorri interpreted berserker, or berserker in Old Norse, as meaning bear shirt, or bear of a shirt. Bear meaning bear, circa meaning shirt.
Ah, okay, so bear shirt leads to no armor.
Exactly. That led him to conclude they went into battle without clothing or armor. However, the more likely and widely accepted interpretation now is bear shirt, or bear skin. Bear related to bear, meaning warriors who wore bear skins.
Wore them how? Like as cloaks?
Maybe as cloaks, maybe integrated into their armor, perhaps over it, as the symbol, of their ferocity and strength channeling the bear.
So the iconic image of the naked berserker might just boil down to one guy's linguistic mistake centuries ago. That's kind of wild.
That seems to be the strong implication from the source material, yeah.
Right.
They weren't naked. They were likely armored warriors who used bear skins or similar animal motifs as part of their gear.
And the Ulfhednar presumably did the same with wolf skins.
That's the logical inference, yes, adorning their battle dress with wolf skins.
Fascinating. Okay, so the nakedness is probably out. That's a big correction. But Snorri also talks about the rage, the boosted strength, the near invulnerability. Does that part hold up against other sources?
Yes, it does. Our source notes that the core description, them being incredibly powerful, filled with this intense rage and exceptionally hard to wound because of that state that's consistent. You see that across other late pagan and even early Christian sources from Scandinavia.
So the stories agree on the effect of the rage, even if Snorri got the no armor detail wrong.
Exactly. The power, the fury, the resilience in battle, that's a common thread.
And this berserker rage, it wasn't always shown as purely a good thing in the legends, was it? Like a superpower you could just switch on.
No, definitely not. That's another layer of the complexity our source highlights. While it grants this, immense strength and resilience, the sagas also show the terrifying downside, a loss of control.
Like they couldn't turn it off.
Sometimes, yeah. The rage could seize warriors when they didn't want it to, leading them to cause unintentional harm, even killing allies or, innocent bystanders in the heat of it. It was a power that could easily consume you.
Right, that makes them much more complex, almost tragic figures in some stories. Let's dig a bit more into those two types you mentioned earlier, the elite champions versus the roaming bandits.
Okay, sure. So the elite warriors, you often find them in sagas like Egil Saga, Vatnsgulla Saga, and Roll Saga Kraka. They're typically shown as loyal to a king or a prince.
Bodyguards, champions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Serving as bodyguards, champions in duels, or just their best fighters. They're often described as this tight-knit group and frequently numbering 12 men.
12, that number pops up again. Any idea why 12?
The source notes the pattern, this recurring group of 12, but says the actual significance isn't entirely clear from the material we have. It's just there.
Interesting.
But yeah, they function as these heroic champions for the king. And in that context, sometimes the word berserker almost sounds like a title, like saying someone's an elite warrior.
Okay, and then you have the flip side, the dangerous bandits.
Right? These guys usually show up alone, maybe in pairs, or sometimes in groups of 12, too, interestingly enough. But they are the antagonists.
What kind of trouble do they cause?
They roam the land, robbing, murdering, challenging landowners or heroes to duels, often unfair ones, even stealing wives and daughters. Classic villain behavior.
So they're the obstacles for the saga hero to overcome.
Exactly.
Right.
They serve as tests for the vain character, like in Grettir the Strong or the Heidrek Saga. Defeating them proves the hero's strength and worthiness. So you have these two very distinct narrative roles, both fueled by that same intense rage-based power.
It's mostly male figures we hear about, but our source mentioned something in the Edda that might hint otherwise about women.
Ah, yes. In the Harbard Song, which is part of the Poetic Edda, there's a line where the god Thor is boasting. He recounts a battle on an island called Helice.
Okay.
And he says he fought and slew the wives of berserkers there. And he describes them fighting him like wild she-wolves, using iron clubs.
Whoa. Fighting Thor with iron clubs, that sounds incredibly fierce. Does the source say this means there were female berserkers?
Well, the source discusses this as an ambiguity. It's a fascinating passage, for sure. It clearly depicts these really fierce female warriors who are connected to berserkers.
But not necessarily berserkers themselves.
It's not definitively clear. Should we interpret this as meaning female berserkers existed in the same way? Or does it just mean that berserkers had exceptionally tough, formidable wives who would fight fiercely, maybe alongside them or defending their homes?
So it's tantalizing, but not quite conclusive proof.
Exactly. It's a really interesting detail, but maybe not solid proof of female berserker warriors in that specific technical sense.
Okay, so we've painted this picture from the literature, the champions, the bandits, the complex rage, maybe these fierce wives. But these figures, they must have some roots in a real historical past, right? They didn't just spring out of nowhere.
Oh, absolutely. Our source links them very clearly to the pagan era, and specifically, as we touched on with Snorri, to cults centered around the god of war, Odin.
So Snorri wasn't just making up that Odin connection for his story.
No, that seems to reflect a genuine historical association. The theory is that the origin lies in ancient Germanic warrior cults. These were groups dedicated to Odin.
What did these cults involve?
Well, warriors in these cults worshipped Odin, maybe associated themselves with the dead or the battlefield dead, and they often imitated powerful animals, wolves and bears being prime examples, seen as symbols of war and strength.
Animal imitation.
possibly through wearing skins or masks, but crucially, during their cult rituals, these warriors would try to enter a state of ecstatic trance.
Trance, like shamanic trance.
Something like that, yeah. The belief, or at least the goal, was to embody the animal's characteristics, the ferocity of the wolf, the sheer strength of the bear.
And our source points out that this trance state, it could have a very real physiological effect, couldn't it? It wasn't just symbolic.
Yes, absolutely. It highlights that ecstatic trance, intense psychological states. They can induce a reduced sensitivity to pain and external influences. Think extreme adrenaline rush combined with an altered state of consciousness.
So it genuinely suppresses pain response.
It can, yes, for a time.
Ah, okay. So the legendary invulnerability, that not feeling wounds part, that might actually stem from a real, though temporary, physiological state achieved during these rituals.
Precisely. They weren't literally immune to swords, obviously, but in that state of ecstatic fury, pumped full of adrenaline, maybe in a kind of trance, they might genuinely not feel the pain from blows that would stop a normal warrior cold.
And that real experience then gets exaggerated in the stories.
Exactly. Over time, that real experience of trance, reduced pain, and fierce fighting likely evolved into the literary image of the invulnerable, supernaturally furious berserker. The berserker rage we read about becomes the legendary interpretation of this actual trance state.
Is there any, hard evidence for these specific Odin cults or practices? Archaeological stuff?
Our source mentions some visual evidence. For example, depictions on Thoros Lunda's helmet plates, which date from the 6th to 7th century. Pre-Viking age, but relevant.
What do they show?
These plates show a warrior wearing what looks like a wolfskin mask, and he seems to be dancing, maybe ritually. Alongside him is another figure wearing a horned helmet, often interpreted as representing Odin himself.
Wow.
So this is often believed to depict a scene right out of one of these Odin mask cult rituals. A warrior channeling an animal connected to the god.
That's pretty compelling visual proof that something like this was happening back then. How widespread were these cults by the main Viking age, though? 800s, 900s?
That's where the source notes some uncertainty. It's not entirely clear how widespread these specific mask and warrior cults dedicated to Odin still were during the height of the Viking Age itself. They might have been older traditions by then.
But we do see laws popping up against berserkers later on, don't we? Around the time of Christianization.
Yes, exactly. During the late pagan period, and as Christianity took hold in Scandinavia, laws were enacted specifically prohibiting berserkers and their rampages, the Berserksgang.
So is it clear if those laws were targeting the specific Odin cult warriors, trying to stamp out pagan practices? Or were they just banning, violent, out-of-control warrior behavior in general, which the berserker image had come to represent?
And the source raises that exact ambiguity. It's a point of debate. Were these laws aimed squarely at suppressing the older Odin warrior cults? Or were they more general public order laws against disruptive, violent warriors who were called berserkers, regardless of specific cultic links by that time?
Hard to say for sure.
It is, but connecting the dots overall. The literary figures with their almost supernatural rage, strength, invulnerability, they seem to have a clear historical model in these earlier warriors.
Warriors connected to Odin.
Yes. Part of Odin cults, likely using animal skins symbolically, entering states of ecstatic trance, trying to embody animal ferocity and strength. And this resulted in a real physiological state that could be interpreted, or maybe exaggerated, as near invulnerability in combat stories.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting then, because with this historical understanding, we can now directly tackle some of the most common modern myths about berserkers.
Exactly. We've already hit the biggest one. The idea they fought naked.
Right. That seems to come from Snorri's mistranslation. The sources suggest armor, maybe decorated with animal skins?
Correct. Bear skins, wolf skins, part of their warrior identity.
Okay, what about Svinfylken? I've definitely heard that name thrown around sometimes, almost like they were a third type of berserker, maybe boar skin warriors.
Ah, yes. The Svinfylken. Our source is pretty clear on this. That idea is simply not supported by the evidence we have.
So no boar berserkers.
The concept of Svinfylken being a third type of warrior wearing boar skins seems to be a modern misconception, maybe mixing things up.
Okay, so what is Svinfylken then, according to the sources, if not a warrior type?
It's the name for a specific battle formation used in the Viking Age. It translates to swine-array, or more commonly pig's head, or boar's snout, a wedge formation.
A battle formation, like how troops lined up, not a type of warrior at all.
Exactly. It describes tactics, not troop types. Now, to be fair, Boars and wild boars were symbolically important in Germanic culture. You see them in decoration, and there's evidence for boar-crested helmets. Very significant animal.
But no boarskin warriors analogous to bearskin or wolfskin ones.
The source finds no evidence for that, no. No distinct type of berserker warrior linked specifically to boarskins, and certainly no historical division of these warriors into three unique categories like berserker, Ulfednar, and Stinfilken.
So really just Berserker and Ulfednar describing basically the same kind of warrior connected to bears and wolves, and Berserker just became the more common term over time.
That seems to be the most accurate picture based on the sources, yes. No evidence for distinct fighting styles or separate divisions named that way.
Right. Okay, let's tackle the other major modern theory, maybe the most persistent one. The idea that Berserker rage was caused by drugs, specifically those red and white mushrooms.
Ah yes, the fly-agaric theory. Amanita muscaria. This idea really took off in the 19th century, proposed by a Swedish scholar, Samuel Oatman.
And what was his basis for connecting fly-agaric to berserkers?
Well, he based it on hearsay accounts. Reports about Siberian shamans who supposedly used the fly-agaric mushroom to induce trance states.
Okay.
So he theorized that the toxins, the psychoactive compounds in the mushroom, could explain the berserkers' incredible fury, their strength, their insensitivity to pain.
It sounds plausible on the surface, maybe, but our source lists several pretty big problems with that theory.
It does, quite a few. First, Oatman himself was relying on second or third-hand reports about Siberia, not direct observation of the mushroom's effects in a warrior context, or even necessarily accurate reports.
Okay, not ideal.
Second, while fly-agaric does contain psychoactive compounds, muscimol mainly, the concentrations can vary wildly, and often the relevant active ingredients are actually in quite low amounts.
And perhaps most importantly for someone needing to fight effectively, what else does it do?
Exactly. This is the kicker. The fly-agaric also contains other toxins, like ibotenic acid, which produce effects that are really undesirable if you're trying to be a coherent fighter.
Like what?
Things like drowsiness, soporific effects, wanting to sleep,
Yeah.
also intense nausea, vomiting, muscle cramps or twitching, confusion, and uncontrollable hallucinations that aren't necessarily battle fury related.
Yeah, that doesn't exactly sound like the recipe for being a super effective pain-immune warrior on the battlefield. More
Yeah.
like being sick and confused.
Precisely. It just doesn't line up well with the descriptions of focused, albeit furious, combatants. So the fly-agaric mushroom theory seems highly improbable based on what we know about its effects.
Okay, so fly-agaric is likely out. What about other substances? Could they have used something else? Some other plant, maybe?
Well, the source acknowledges that it's possible. It's certainly possible that the original Odin cult warriors back in the day might have used some kind of substance in their rituals to help induce trance. We see similar practices in other warrior cultures around the world.
But do we have any evidence for it?
And that's the crucial point. The sources provide basically no concrete evidence for any specific substance being used by berserkers, whether mushrooms, herbs, or anything else. We don't know.
So the whole berserkers took drugs idea is really just speculation. No textual or archaeological proof.
Pretty much pure speculation.
Yeah.
And our source presents an equally, if not maybe more, plausible alternative.
Sure.
No substances were needed at all.
How so?
Think about it. Things like intense group dances, rhythmic war chants, drumming, maybe hyperventilation, fasting, psychological conditioning, group hysteria. All these ritualistic practices could have been perfectly capable of building adrenaline to extreme levels and inducing the necessary ecstatic trance state for fierce fighting without any drugs involved.
Self-induced altered states, basically.
Yes. Through psychophysical techniques. And as we noted earlier, in many of the legends themselves, the berserker rage often appears as this kind of magical power, almost like a curse sometimes, that can overtake the hero unexpectedly.
Which doesn't really fit with deliberately taking a substance beforehand every time.
Not always, no. Sometimes it just happens to them in the stories.
Okay, so pulling all this together, what does this all mean for us today? You know, when we think about the berserker, how should we picture them now?
Well, I think it means the popular modern image is, a significant oversimplification and, frankly, inaccurate in key ways. We've seen how the sources help correct major myths, the whole naked warrior thing, the idea of Svinfilken as a separate boar warrior type, and this highly speculative, probably wrong fly-agaric drug theory.
Right, so we strip away those modern layers. What are we left with?
We're left with a much more complex figure, rooted in ancient warrior cults, probably tied to the god Odin. Warriors who entered states of ecstatic trance, who used powerful animal symbolism, bears, wolves, and whose very real physiological experiences in that state, like reduced pain sensitivity and immense fury, likely evolved over time into the powerful, often dual-natured archetype we see in the legends.
Dual-natured meaning.
Meaning sometimes they're the heroic champions, the elite defenders, and other times they're the terrifying bandits, the antagonists, both drawing on that same core concept of the trance-like rage. What's fascinating here is really watching how a historical practice, something likely involving ritual, altered states of consciousness, animal symbolism, how that transformed over centuries into this potent, almost supernatural figure in mythology and legend.
It really shows that blurred line, doesn't it, between historical experience, ritual practice, and the power of storytelling.
Absolutely. And how legend can kind of crystallize around a real phenomenon, but then take on a life of its own.
And maybe that's something for you, the listener, to consider how easily we seem to gravitate towards simple explanations like, oh, it was just a mushroom, for really complex historical phenomena like ecstatic trance or warrior cults or how legends are formed. And maybe think about how the stories we continue to tell can reshape or sometimes obscure the historical reality over time.